Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
All right, we'll just give it my usual minute or two so people can get in. Keep admitting folks as they come in. Yes. I'm gonna put my video on and I'll be back in 1.5 minutes. Okay, how is everybody doing today? Good. I hope you can tell me how you're doing in the chat, or you can unmute and say it. But I hope folks are doing well. Let me admit some more people. All right, cool. Doing fine, doing good. Good afternoon. Hello. Great to see, great to hear and see you. All right, so we're gonna continue today. When we were last together, I went over the assignment on symbolism. I did get an email from Lindsay, I believe, a question in the student question about not getting a response. So I wanted to, so the way I'm working, so I didn't see an email I didn't see a thread in the assignment. So everybody, when you upload your work, you have to upload it to the assignment because that's where I'm gonna look for it. And for this particular assignment, I had asked that if, because of the personal nature of it, if you did not want to upload it, you could email it to me, but then you would have to go into the chat or into the assignment, the thread, and just say, sent by email, which some of you did. So, so Lindsay, if you're one of those people that felt like you needed to email it to me and not put it in the thread, then you needed to go into the thread to let me know that you did that so I can look for it in the email.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
But anything just for the future with everyone, if it's the way to organize the class, if the assignment is in that thread, you should respond in that thread. And that's also going to be helpful going forward because the next assignment that you submit, it's just important to do that. I'm confusing it with one other class. Another class, people are going to be looking at each other's work. So, so that class is important because people have to be able to have access to it. All right, so we're going to continue today. I know that maybe one or two of you are going to still submit the assignment. Definitely do that. Today, after this class, I have meetings from 2, 3, and 4. So most of today is going to be taken up with meetings, but tomorrow I'll be able to look at your assignments and give you feedback on those. But so I'm going to continue with our poetry handout. That's what we started talking about last time. And last time we started talking about like the types of poetry, the different kind of forms in terms of like a narrative poem, which tells a story, a dramatic monologue, which is usually included in the play, or The other kind is a lyric poem, which really focuses on emotion and feeling and evoking an idea, right? Making us think. So, so for that, those were the three main kind. And then we started talking about some of the poetic elements, right? Some of the elements of that poets use, or some of the techniques that poets use to tell a poem, to share a poem. And so some of the ones we talked about were sound ones, right? We talked about rhymes, and we went together doing a rhyme scheme, like doing seeing the pattern that the rhymes are in. So the sounds that sound the same, if they're next to each other, sometimes we'll see that they'll be alternating. Rhyme schemes could look a lot of different kinds of ways. We talked about other sounds. We talked about alliteration, and that's when the first word, the first letter of the word is the same, as in, like I mentioned, like in Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? So all that P is an example of alliteration, right? When you're repeating that. We talked about assonance, right, and consonants, and consonants is when a consonant, which is like all the letters that are not A, E, I, O, U, right? The regular, the consonants are not vowels. The vowels are A, E, I, O, U. But when the consonants are repeated, like there was one example with a mummy's mommy, and that means that, you know, the letter M, how that consonant got repeated. So sometimes poets are using that on purpose, right? They're creating rhythm with these things. They're creating patterns. They're creating a sound. Those things are to evoke a feeling. We talked about assonance and cacophony, and assonance is vowel letters like the letter I, which are smoother letters, right? As opposed to cacophony, which are like K's and P's and letters that have a force to them. They could be used to, particularly, maybe there's an energy in the poem, right? Maybe the topic they're writing about is one that's uncomfortable, and they might use cacophonous sounds to amplify that feeling in the poem. So all of this to say is that poets really craft poems with a lot of purpose, right? And one purpose might be a theme, right? So we talked about theme and subject, and theme was the main story, the main idea that the poet might try to convey, right? And the ones that we've read, some of you identified theme being in Pablo Neruda's love, passion, longing, right? Desiring somebody, that those are themes inside of Pablo Neruda's The Queen. We talked about Tupac Shakur's A Rose That Grew from Concrete, and some of you identified that a theme in that was perseverance, right? Overcoming the odds, right? Believing in yourself, right? So all of those ideas, those themes exist inside of these poems. We read Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost, and that was about, also it was about nature, but we said it was about like how nothing is eternal, right? How things change, right? The cycles of life, or cycles of existence, like things are born and things die, and then things are born again, and, you know, the cycles of nature. So all of these ideas, these themes, are the things we began talking about in poems, right? The poems have these things inside of them. And that, and now that we are starting to put our focus, put our gaze into that, right? We're starting to look at what the poets are doing inside of the poem. So we're going to look at a couple of more. I asked you to read the handout, so read it, because the handout's going to help you. Is also a resource for you. It's not the definitive source, right? It's not like the final source of all the poetic elements. There are many, many, many more. And if you were all English majors studying poetry, you probably would learn them, right? But you're here. This is an introduction class, so you're being introduced to poetry, and it's not like you've never read a poem before, and definitely not before. After, I can say that today, because at least we've definitely read 3 or 4 together. But it's an intro class, so you're learning the concept that poets are and I said we, but I'm not a poet. I'm a writer, I'm not a poet. And I'll tell you, there's a difference, right? Poets are I love poets and I love poetry because I think the way in which they work, the way their brains work with literature and words and how they construct a poem and how they do everything with purpose, right? And they use sometimes a little tiny space, right? They like 3 stanzas with like 4 lines each, like 12 lines say so much. An example is Nothing Gold Can Stay, right? Tupac Shakur's poem is tiny. It's a small, short poem, but it packs such a punch. And I think that poems have the capacity to do that in a way that sometimes fiction and other prose literature, needs more space to achieve the same thing. So, okay. So I want to go back to the poetry handout. So I'm going to share my screen and then we can go through it together. The handout's in there. I know when I started saying it's important for you to read it because when you write your essay, and clearly your next assignment is a step toward that, but when you write your essay, you're going to be able to use this as a reference, right? So let me make it a little bigger. You can all see it. Hopefully you can all see it. And I'm going to minimize this. Let's see. What's doing here? And nobody's showing their face today, but right now it's okay because we're just seeing the screen. But all right, so we went through this part and this beginning part with subject and theme. We began talking about sound, right? I went over this. Euphony and cacophony and assonance, right? We started talking about enjambment, how things get broken up, how poets don't necessarily end the sentence at the end of the margin, that they could break it at any point. They could break up a sentence. They don't have to do a whole sentence. They don't have to keep it grammatically correct with a period at the end and then begin on the next line if they wanted to. They could break it in the middle of the line. And here, literally, these are called line breaks in poetry. They literally got the line breaks. Then we went into rhyme scheme, and they said we weren't going to spend a lot of time on meter. And so now let's pick it up here on page 7, where it says literary effects in poetry. So we talked about symbolism, even without having a big, deep definition of symbolism. We know the symbols are something when something represents something else. Like a word could be like the rose. The rose was a flower, and we all know what a rose is. But in this case, in Tupac's poem, a rose represented a person, right? And it gave them characteristics, like humanistic characteristics, right? And then there's a word for it, and it's escaped me. All right, but personified. Okay, so it personified the rose. Like I said, it learned how to walk without having feet, right? The idea of a rose walking is unusual, and without having feet, like not having what you normally need to have to be successful to walk, the rose was able to accomplish that despite not having the tools necessary, or tools that we would think would be necessary to succeed. Okay, so so the other ones are metaphors and similes, right? And I say metaphors and similes because there's a relationship to symbols. Like metaphors are symbols, but not all symbols are metaphors, right? Right? Metaphors could be symbols, but not all symbols are metaphors. That means that a metaphor is a specific type of symbol. It's a category of symbol. So let's look at metaphors and similes, because a lot of times you hear that word in English classes and you hear that word in discussions, and we hear metaphors a lot, right? But and similes is kind of there, but we don't, and sometimes people talk about them together. So, because metaphors and similes are about comparison, right? So a symbol is like a rose could be compared to a human being, right? The concrete could be compared to, to be something that is hard, something that is difficult, something that's hard to break through, right? So let's talk about metaphors and similes. So metaphors, right, and similes can add a deeper meaning to a poem. So simile compares two things with the words like or as. So a simile, that is one distinction. When something's being compared to something that is like or the word like or as, like you smell as pretty as a rose, right? So that is what simile could be. Or you are pretty like a sunset, right? You are smart like an professor, okay? So using like or using as is when you make that comparison, right? But when a metaphor says something isn't, right, is the thing. So instead of saying you smell like you are as pretty as a rose, you look at someone and says, oh my goodness, you're a rose, right? So we know that they're not literally a rose, but what you're doing is you're comparing them to a rose, but you're not using like or as. So if you would say you're as pretty as a rose, that would be a simile. If you say, oh goodness, you're so pretty, you're a rose, that would be a metaphor, right? Because we know that the person's not a metaphor, but you're comparing them to them, but you're just not using like or as. Okay, so I keep looking over there because my little screen is over here, but I should look over there because that's where you are at. But actually, you're not seeing me except in a little tiny box probably because I am sharing my screen. All right, so those are metaphors and similes. There's other ones I listed here like irony, right? Puns, analogies, those are all kinds of comparisons and literary devices that could be used that we can identify. Sometimes there's visual effects in poetry. There's a poem, and here's a poem, right? I give you an example. You can't really read the poem, but it's really for you to look at the shape. I think if you've got it real close, you might be able to read some of it. Yeah, you zoom in, you could read it, right? But this is a poem that that is about it's Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll is the writer of Alice in Wonderland, and this poem here that it's about a cat's tail. So the way Lewis Carroll lays it out is in this kind of zigzag form of a tail. Now this little picture is there to give you an idea of what Lewis Carroll was doing. But the point I want to make is that sometimes the way a poem is laid out on the page can sometimes be, not sometimes, is very often intentional. So that's why very often when I'm copying and creating a poem, I'm very careful of the line break or the shape of how they do it. There is a, let me see, somebody put something in the chat. Okay. We'll talk about assignment. There's not an assignment due today, but I'm going to talk about the assignment, okay? The next assignment is due next week, as far as I remember, if I can remember. So, but looking at the shape of the poem could be that there's a poem in your packet that's about illness, and it's I think it's illness and HIV medication, and the poem is shaped like a pill bottle, right? So the poet was working with that with a visual effect in poetry, right? We're going to read a poem. I mean, we'll read one today. We'll read one today that has a different visual effect, right? Not necessarily like it's an animal tail or pill bottle, but has a different kind of effect. And we'll look at it and you can agree or disagree with me, but I'll let you know what the poet was trying to do with it. So, so this is like, now we're going to start looking at, well, here, I just gave you an example of an acrostic poem. And so a lot of times in an acrostic poem, I listen to the visual effects because the poet is working with this too. This is a poem called Elizabeth by Edgar Allan Poe. And if you read the poem, it says, Elizabeth, it is in vain you say, love not, thou sayest it in so sweet a way. In vain those words from thee, or L-E-L, Xantipp's talents had enforced so well. Ah, if that language from thy heart arise, breathe it less gently forth and veil thine eyes. Endymion, recollect, when Luna tried to cure his love, was cured of all beside, his folly, pride, and passion, for he died. I could break that down. I'm not going to break it down right now. I'm going to say a couple little things in it, but we're going to move on. This is not a poem we're going to focus on today. But the reason why this is here is because the poem is called Elizabeth, right? And it's called an acrostic poem. And an acrostic poem, what it does, it takes the title of it, right? Usually a name, right? And then the first line of each poem begins with that. So you see Elizabeth. So the first letter of each line spells Elizabeth. That's called an acrostic poem. Okay. All right. So that's another visual effects. So I want to talk about imagery, because imagery is another aspect of another technique that writers, poets use, but all writers use, right? And that is involving the five senses. And so they usually do that with description, right? Excuse me, let me take a little water. So they usually do that by description. So how they describe something in a poem, that has an effect. So in description, getting all the five senses in, you have things like, sight. That is the one that many, many people use. Like you can imagine it. They try to describe the colors of a sunset, and they try to describe, the size and the shape and the curve and whatever it is that they do description, right? So they're trying to create a mental picture. But the senses are five, right? At least we know we have five senses. And so the five senses also include sound, right? And in poetry, sound is used a lot. There's smell, there's touch, right? So there's so these senses are usually used. There's taste is the other one, are used inside of it. So being aware of that, right? Being aware of that the poets are using imagery, using things, using techniques to help us come into the poem. Because one of the ways that we experience life, that we experience pleasure, that we experience pain, that we experience, many emotions and many activities in life is through our senses, right? You smell delicious food, right? You get hungry, right? You put, something like a candy or a fruit or, or big slice of greasy pizza in your mouth, and you enjoy that flavor, all those, your mouth goes crazy and you start enjoying those flavors. So the senses are one of the touch, right? It's another thing. Touch, your physical sense. Monday, I think we were here, I told you there was no heat in my apartment. It was cold. I was ghetto. I put the oven on, I have a space heater, but I needed to feel comfortable to teach my class and be with you. So the senses are a way that poets are very often trying to employ those techniques so that we have some kind of experience. Remember, lyric poems are about an experience. So they use the five sentences. So now I'm going to go into this next section, and let's see, we'll do as many of these, like not too many. We'll do a handful. Maybe do three. So sometimes poems could be two different kinds of ways in terms of poetic traditions, or what we call them closed forms and open forms. Okay, so sometimes a poem is just free verse. That means that there is not a particular structure that they're following, and so that's going to make more sense in about 5 minutes. Okay. So because the other side, besides free verse, are closed forms, or forms that are specific, right? And so specific meaning that there are rules that the poet has to use in order to construct that particular poem, right? Let me check in the chat. Calligraphy, what is the this that you're referring to, Allan, when you say could this be done with calligraphy? Is it like a visual element, or what are you referring to with this? Yeah, so definitely, yeah. Calligraphy, lettering can also be used as a visual element. This up here that we were talking about, the visual effects in poetry. So coming down, so there's going to be free verse. That means there isn't a structure, but then there'll be others that are rules, right? So the rules are specific structures that the poet is following in order to construct the poem. Now, a lot of times we'll just read them, and we'll just read the poem, and where this line breaks, and of course we're aware that there's punctuation. We know what an exclamation point is, and what a question mark is, and what a period is. So they'll be doing all those kinds of things, but they'll be doing, and we'll follow that. But then sometimes they're working with the rules of that particular that define that particular form. So the first one I have here is a sonnet, right? And I'm going to read it first. I'm going to read you. This is how we'll get to hear Shakespeare sonnet. And this is one of his most famous sonnets. And most of his sonnets deal with love as well. Okay. So it's called Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? One of the most famous William Shakespeare poems. We know he wrote a bunch of plays, but he also wrote a bunch of sonnets and poems and stuff like that. So here we go. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that thou fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in its shade. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, so remember, unlocking a poem, I'm going to read it a second time, and then we're going to go through it slowly and break it down. Second reading. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in its shade, when eternal lines to the time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, so we're going to break the poem down, but now I'm going to go swing up. And so this Shakespearean sonnet, right, has some rules. There's 14 lines and a specific rhyme scheme, right? So that's what we know about this, that there's 14 lines in here, and there's a specific line scheme. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Now I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to do what I did with the other class, and let's check out what the rhyme scheme could be. Okay. Let me put it here. Okay, and let me give it a little space so that we could format line spacing, make it double space, give it some space, and let's make this bigger, and then I'll zoom in. Okay, that's nice. It should be very visible to all of you. So if we remember when we're doing rhyme schemes, we use the letters A, B, C, D to compare the sounds, right? To match up the sounds. So I'm going to start with the letter A, and let me admit Catherine. Okay, let me move it up a little bit more. So Catherine, if you're just joining, since you're just joining us, we were reading a poem, and I'm now looking, and it's specifically a sonnet. And so we identified that a sonnet has 14 lines, and we're looking at a closed form. So sonnet has 14 lines and has a specific rhyme scheme. So we're about to start looking at what the rhyme scheme is going to be. Okay. Okay, cool. Whoops. Let me make it small. Great. So day and temperate, right, is different, right? Those are different. Day, temperate, right? So that would be a B, A and B. But then May rhymes with day, so then that would be an A, right? And then temperate and date, that is what's called a slant rhyme. It's not exactly, but it's pretty close. So that's what he's working with. So far the rhyme scheme, yesterday they were like A, B, B, right? But we can see they can be different. So here's A, B, A, B. Let's go to the next sound, shines. That doesn't rhyme with date, May, nothing up there. So
C.
Exactly, thank you. So that would be C. And then dimmed would be what?
E?
E.
Wait, no, D.
Yeah, it would be E,
Hey, D.
right? And then we see declines, and declines would be what?
Times will be C.
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 E.
And then
And that would be D.
all right, what about fade?
E.
Yeah, it would be E.
E.
And then oist,
F.
F, that we and then shade,
E.
and then growest.
F.
F.
And then
G.
And D. Let's see.
Someone's audio is on.
right, so we see there's like A, B, C, D, E, F, and then G, G. So there's like for the 4 lines, they kind of alternate rhyme, the next 4, but then the last 2 rhyme with each other. So now if you look for Shakespearean sonnet, and even though it's called the Shakespearean sonnet, other people write sonnets in this form. One of the rules? That the sonnet has to be only 14 lines. And the second rule is that it has to have this kind of rhyme scheme, right? That it will be this particular kind of rhyme scheme. And that's one of the ways you identify what a sonnet is. So let me go back to this makes me, let me do this. Try to move some of these things that are not about class out of the way. I try to close all this stuff. This is this. Just close that. Just bear with me 1 second. Close that. Close. All right. All right. Let me just stay here for a minute because I'm wasting time. So now let's break it down a bit, right? Let's go to the Shakespeare sonnet, right? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So one of the things we'll notice right away is he's using words like thee, thou, art, right? So he's not writing using contemporary language that we use today. He's using like Middle English, right? So we have to be able to translate Middle English, right? So in Middle English, we know, yeah. Yeah, no. Who's that? Catherine, yeah. So no, Catherine, we're just going over a poem. I'm gonna, the format for today, I'm gonna go through the poetry handout. We'll probably read 1 or 2 more poems, and then I'm gonna go over the assignment. So that's today's format. So shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Is asking the question. So thee means you, right? Thou also is like you. It's another way. That thee and thou are like you, your, right? Or like you are, okay? And art is are. Let me just see if there's any other ones. Hath is have. And I think that might be, and if thou, oh, it's okay. So, and you notice that they're also working with like punctuation. He could have put D-I-M-M-E-D, dimmed and then trimmed, but uses the apostrophe to abbreviate it. So let's go up here. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So it says, should I compare you to a summer's day? It's asking, it's like wondering, should I compare you to a summer's day? And then it says, thou art more lovely and more temperate, right? It says, should I compare you to a summer's day? You're more lovely and you're more temperate, right? Because summer's days, if you imagine summer, is hot, right? So extreme in temperature is either hot or cold, but he goes, no, you are more lovely and more temperate. And then it says, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, right? Wind, windy May, windy can move the buds, the flower buds in May. He's wondering, right? Yes, definitely admiring her beauty. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. So a lease is what? A lease is how long you get to live in an apartment, right? This is the amount of time you get to live. So he says, rough winds to shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease has all too short a date. So summer doesn't last that long. And then the poem's still wondering, sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines. What do you think the eye of heaven is in this case? Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines. No clue. They're talking about, he's talking about
The
sun.
sun?
Yeah, the sun. Thank you, I'm seeing it, sun. Right, so sometimes too hot, the eye of heaven shines, right? Sometimes the sun is too hot, right? And often is his gold complexion dimmed. What do you think that means? What do you, his means the sun, right? The sun. What do you think the gold complexion gets dimmed? What do you think that could mean?
Is it talking about nighttime?
Yeah, sometimes it goes away. Sometimes the sun's too hot, it goes away, a cloud could cover it, right? The complexion gets dimmed. And then the next line says, and every fair from fair sometimes declines. Do people know what the word fair might mean in that sentence? I'll give you a hint in case. That's like, oh, she was a fair maiden. That didn't help. So fair very often means beauty, like somebody who's beautiful. Her looks, yes, thank you, Allan, so her looks. So every fair from fair sometimes declines. Sometimes beauty fades, right? By nature's, because beauty fades and there's a comma, right? By chance or nature's changing course untrimmed, right? So sometimes beauty fades. Every fair from face sometimes decline by chance because things happen, or nature, right? Nature's changing course because nature's course untrimmed doesn't stop, right? To trim something is to stop it, right? So sometimes beauty fades and by chance or because that's just the way nature goes, right? It doesn't stop. And then it takes this turn. He goes, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. Like if I look at you and I compare you and I say, your eternal summer will not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor lose possession, you won't lose your beauty of that fair thou owest. Like owest means that you own, like you have, right? So I'll go back to the line. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Like, right? If you'll see at the end probably where this is going, and it has probably a connection to the queen, and you'll see. And it says, nor death brag thou wanderest in its shade. So nor shall death, right? Death was not going to brag or tell people, right, that thou wanderest, walk around in its shade, right? And nor will death be able to claim you that you're with him. And when in eternal lines of time thou growest, right? So even as you get older, right? Because what happens when we get older? Eventually you die, right? That it's saying not even death is going to be able to brag about you being in the shade when in eternal lines to time thou growest as you get older. And then he says, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. What do you think that this is in that last line? Yes, so eternal lines could be wrinkles too. Yes. Yes, Coral. That's another interpretation of the eternal lines to time growest. Right? Wrinkles are a signifier of aging, and that's what that line is about. But the last line, so long, it is something about romance. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So the this in this poem, the this is the poem, right? So you're right. I think Allan and other people are making comments that this is also a love poem, right? So this is a poem about basically the beauties in the eye of the beholder, right? So if I go to the beginning and I read it, it says, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Wondering, but you're more lovely, right? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. And the rough winds shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease doesn't last long, has too short a date. And sometimes the sun is just too hot. And even the sun has its complexion dimmed, and even beauty fades, right? And by nature's change, by beauty fades by just nature's course because of what's natural, or by chance, right? But your eternal summer, the way I see you, your eternal summer will never fade. and it's not going to grow, it's not going to lose its beauty, and you'll never die, right? Even if you grow old, you will never die, because as long as men can breathe, right? As long as people are alive and can see, right? If we can see, then we can read this poem. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee, right? So it's definitely about that. It's about how this person feels about another person, and by writing this poem, they get the person they love gets to live forever, right? The love for her is eternal, yes. So their love is eternal, and they immortalize it by writing the poem. So by having the poem, they live forever, right? So whoever this person was that Shakespeare was writing about, we don't know, but now that person lives forever because whatever, hundreds of years later, you know, here we are in an English 111 class based out of the Bronx, reading about somebody that Shakespeare loved, and we don't know who that person is. So anyway, that's us breaking down the poem a bit. Here, I could just go here. Just open it again, okay. So the sonnet is one form of a closed form that has 18 lines and 14 lines, and a specific rhyme scheme. A really short one that we'll do that's kind of easy is a haiku, and you've probably heard of a haiku, right? A haiku has a specific structure. It's 3 lines, and it's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and then 5 syllables. That's it. 3 lines, 5, 7, 5. And here's a haiku that I put in our packet, just so you can see it. So immediately if you see it's 3 lines, most likely it's a haiku. But the other rule for haiku is it has to have 5, 7, 5, right? So here's by If Not for the Cat by Jack Predeletsky, right? If not for the cat and the scarcity of cheese, I could be content, right? So that is having a perspective. Who do you think is speaking? If not for the cat and the scarcity of cheese, I could be content. Who could be saying that?
A mouse?
Yes, a mouse. There it comes in the chat and in the voice. Definitely a mouse, right? If it wasn't for the cat and that there's no cheese, I would be happy, right? So let's look at the structure, right? So if not for the cat, 5, and the scarcity of cheese, 7, I could be content, right? So there we go. They follow the rule, 5, 7, 5. We'll do one more, and let's do this one. Life is a Dance. Okay, so Life is a Dance is a VNL, a rondeau. And rondeaus, let me see if let me make it a little smaller so you can read the thing. Can I slide it over? So it was originally a French form written on 2 rhymes, right? So there's only 2 kinds of rhymes. There's 15 lines using the first part of the first line as a refrain. So you see, it can get more complicated, the rules that the poets make up for themselves, and they got to stay within the confines of that rule. So in this one, there's only going to be 2 rhyme sounds. That means there's only going to be an A and a B, right? There's not going to be an A, a B, a C, and a D. There's going to be an A and a B in terms of how the rhymes go. It's going to be 15 lines only, but the first part of the first line is a refrain. So a refrain is a piece that gets repeated, right? It's like a repetition. Refrains happen in songs. Refrain happens in prayers. Per se. So there's refrains where, like, a refrain is like, I grew up Catholic, and that was a long time ago. Like, Hail Mary, Mother, pray for sinners now in the hour of death. No, let me not try it. But sometimes in certain prayers, you repeat the line, like, pray for us sinners, pray for us sinners, pray for, like you say. Say it again.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. So that's what a refrain is. So now let's look at how well Andrea Dietrich does it with this dance. Okay. So they say, Life is a Dance by Andrea Dietrich. Life is a dance we were all born to do. The styles to choose from are more than a few. Some choose simple two-step, some move with flair, some slow dance, some break dance, devil may care. Some freestyle while others just dance on cue. Some tangle with zest, some shuffle soft shoe, others glide easily, waltzing on through. Some change their partners, some stay one pair. Life is a dance. You start with the styles in your own milieu, then grow as you add on new moves you view. You'll stumble, but sometimes dance on sweet air. Just keep the beat, try new steps if you dare. For where you end up is all up to you. Life is a dance. Okay, so we'll break down the meaning and the thing of the poem, but let's look at the rules, right? So there's only two kinds of rhymes, right? Two rhyme sounds. And if we look at the end of the words where we have do, few, so that if we're doing the A, B, those would be A's. And then we have flair and care, and that would be B's, right? So it'd be A, B, B, and then Q. Let me do it like this. Let me bring it to our file so you can see it. Because if I was in the classroom, I'd be writing it on the board. This is my version of the board. Just opening up a doc. Okay. Let me see if I can paste. Oh, you see, this drives me crazy. All right, and then I think she centers everything. Yeah, okay, great. All right, so it's gonna be hard to do that. Okay, so this is the letter, this is an A sound, right? This is also an A, do, few. Let me make it bold so we could see the difference. So I can't space the way I normally space. What if I do that? What if I tab it? See what happens. What if I tab this one? Okay, yeah, I think it's good. And then here, some choose two. Here's flair and care, so this would be a B. Right? And this would be flair and care match. That would be a B. Right? And then Q goes back to A, right? And then shoe and Q. So here we go again. A. And then let's go to the next line. Let me bring it to the next page. Stays together. And then, oh, let me see. I'm sorry, let me just go here. Okay. I'm just trying to get the line breaks down. Okay, got the line breaks. Okay. And then through and shoe continue the A sound. And then pair goes back to B. And then here's the refrain, right? Life is a dance. Right part of the first line, a phrase from the first line gets repeated. Then the refrain. Now we continue. Middle U, we're back to what? The A sound, right? And then view and milieu are back to the A. Air. Oops, sorry. Is back to B. And there is back to B. U is back to the A sound. And then we end with the refrain, right? So we'll notice that there were two rhyme schemes that we're using. So they said that's one of the rules. So only two rhyme schemes. So we have the A, B, B, and it keeps repeating A, B, 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 A. So as long as they stick with only two rhyme sounds, right? As opposed to this one that had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rhyme sounds, right? You have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's 7 rhyme sounds. And in this one only had 2. That's one of the rules. And then they had to have a refrain, which is the first line here. First part of the first line has to be repeated. So here's life is a dance, life is a dance, and then it ends with life is a dance, right? And then it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 lines. So this is just an example to show that in addition to words, that in addition to metaphors, in addition to imagery, in addition to visual effects, in addition to sound effects, that sometimes poets choose to work in a closed form. And a closed form means that there are specific rules that they have to follow, and they have to stick with those rules. And in this case, for a rendu, it is a 15 lines, only 2 rhyme schemes. It must rhyme, but only have two rhyme sounds, and that there must be a refrain. So the first part, some part of the first sentence has to get repeated as a refrain. So now let's go back to the poem and let's read it and see what it says, right? So life is a dance we were all born to do. The styles to choose from are more than a few, right? Some slow, some choose simple two-step. You know, two-step is a country western step. Some move with flair, right? Some have flair when they move. Some slow dance, some break dance, devil may care, right? Do what you want. Some freestyle, and others just dance on cue, right? On cue means 5, 6, 7, 8, go, right? So the first stanza we're saying life is a dance we're all born to do. So it's saying that life is a dance, right? So it's using life and dancing as a metaphor, right? It's saying life is a dance. We know life is not a dance, life is a life, but life is a dance, it's saying we were all born to do. So it's using life as a metaphor. The styles we choose from are more than a few, so we can have different styles, right? You can dance your way, I can dance my way, and then it's going through a list of ways that people can dance, right? Yes, so many different paths in life. Some choose 2 steps, right? Country music, some dance with flair, some slow dance, some break dance. We know what break dancing is, right? And some a devil may care. Some freestyle while others move on cue. Then it goes more, some tango with zest, right? Some supple, soft shoe. If I was in class, I would dance for you. Others glide easily, waltzing on through, right? Waltz is another kind of dance. Some change their partners, some stay one pair. Life is a dance, right? Some change their partners. Sometimes people have lots of partners, right? Lots of loves, many marriages, but there's some people that just stay one pair, right? Life is a dance. And so you start with styles in your own milieu. Milieu means like your own environment, like what you know. So you start with the style dancing in the way you know, right? I see, right? And then it says, then grow as you add on new moves you view. So as you start to learn and look around, you learn new steps, you learn new ways of living, right? You'll stumble, but sometimes dance on sweet air. Just keep the beat, try new steps if you dare. For where you end up is all up to you. Life is a dance, right? So it's really making this comparison between life and dance and using dance steps to talk about the paths that that down wrote that we have in life, right? Yes, and detecting a theme. Good that you said that, Alan. So yes, there's a theme, right? And what theme could exist in this poem? You could type it, shout it out. But the important thing is that to understand, oh, well, I'm looking at this poem. We just went through this whole closed form. Now we're talking about a meaning of it. And one meaning is that life is what you make it, right? That you can learn, like life. Yes, life, Carissa, thank you. So that life, right? This is a theme in here, that life could be very different, right? And the way one person, right, lives is different than the way another person lives. Yes, enjoy the life, everyone, at their own manner. Yes, live life how you need to live life, right? And there's many ways we can do it. You know, we can stay one pair or we can have a whole bunch of them. We could dance with flair, we can do a 2-step. We can do this, we can do it that way, we can do it this way. I want to point out one other thing with this poem is that, and you know, I was trying to be very careful with trying to keep how she was doing her line breaks, how she was doing the line spaces, and also keeping the shape. Because here's another Rondeau by Andrea Rich, right? But this one looks different because she centers it. And this is about dance. This is about movement. And if you look at it, the way she breaks her lines, there is this kind of swinging flow, right? So there's a visual element she's creating in her poetry. There's like this kind of curvy, moving. The poem kind of has, as your eyes move down the page, it moves like this, right? So all of that to say, that's the last closed form we'll do today. You can read the rest of the closed forms if this is something you're like, oh my goodness, there's like almost a puzzle. How do I read it without the professor telling me that it's one or the other and be able to identify it? Yeah, right, to be able to identify the closed form. So again, if you were poetry students and you would be probably writing poems, and you probably have exercises writing poems in all these forms, and you would learn every single form by memory. But you don't have to. You have a handout. Your professor picked ones that he thought was interesting and is sharing a couple with you in class, and you can check out the rest of it. So that's what the rest of this handout has: an elegy, an epigram. We talked about an acrostic, an epistle. And I talked about the evolution of poetry toward the beginning of the class, and we'll talk more about it later on. And there's some sources at the end, so you know where I got all this information from, a lot of this. I put this together. But like I said, it began in the lyre at the beginning, right? Where people reading a poem out loud and somebody playing music to it. Then later on, with the invention of the printing press, poems got written onto a page and they got printed, and then other people were able to read them. And then for many, many, many years, they got studied in universities and da-da. And then you'll learn later on, back in the 60s, was when there was a movement to take poetry out of the institution and put it back into make it a spoken format. And as we know today, as spoken word, there's the beat poets in the 1960s. But all those beat poets and those spoken word artists are going to come later on in the semester. Right now, we're going to stick with these poems on the page and the poems in the poetry packet. So it is 1:28, and so I have an important decision to make. I think the decision I will make is to go over the assignment instead of reading another poem, because I want to read another poem, but we'll have next week. So let's get into some of the business. So next week on Monday, we do not have class. It is President's Day. So we do not have a class scheduled for Monday. So the next time we will see each other will be in 1 week. Yeah, so we will see each other in 1 week. All right, hold that thought. I'll be right. Oh, let me stop sharing my screen for a minute, and then I will share it back again in a second. So hold your and I'm back. Okay, so okay. So Rama, can you hear me? You saying I can't hear him?
It broke off for a while, but I can hear you now. Thank you.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I also ran off to the computer away from the computer for a minute.
Oh,
and,
okay.
And I have a immediate bio break. So I apologize. But so yeah, so yes, okay, great. Now we're going to talk about the assignment. I'm going to go into it. So the next assignment, right, is going to be due on the 16th, right, by midnight on the 16th. And I was going to have it due over the weekend, but I'm like, it's Valentine's Day on Sunday, and Monday we have a day off. So, you know, I want you to use your time the way you need to use your time. So on the 16th by midnight, your next assignment will be due. So that assignment, now we've had an opportunity to at least read about 5 or 6 poems in class together. And we've gotten an opportunity to talk about theme, talk about some elements of poetry, some of the techniques. that the poets use to create work and look at them from visual to sound to rhyming to, you know, a bunch of different things that we're beginning to look at the poems and seeing what poets are able to use to construct them. So your next assignment, right, is building off last time you wrote about specifically about one poetic technique or element, which was symbolism. So now you're going to have the freedom to write about any poetic element plus a theme. So your assignment is going to be to go into the poetry packet, right? You know, read through it, check out the poems. You know, you could use one of the poems we did in class, but there may be poems in there that, you know, that might speak to you or might be interesting in a different kind of way. And to take that poem, and then you're going to construct an assignment where you're going to explore a theme, at least one theme in the poem, and talk about at least one element, right? So you've already done the activity of speaking about an element, right? Because you did that with the symbolism assignment. You spoke about one element from one poem and you were able to describe it and build a paragraph off of it and, you know, describe what it is, identify what it is, find an example from the text, all of those things that you did with that one, now you're going to do with a different poem and with a different poetic element. You can use symbolism with a different poem if you want to, and then find and also discuss the theme in the poem. So let me share my screen again, and we will go back to our class. Let's see, where is it at? Is it here? Yeah, found it. Okay. So whenever I'm in our class in Blackboard, and so remember, any course information like the poetry packet, all that stuff, the information is in the course content. Discussions is where I have homework. I wonder if I could rename that to like homework and assignments instead. Let me figure that out. Okay. And so now I'm going to move it to the top because now it's the new assignment. So your other assignment is still on our Blackboard. It's just going to move down a bit because now the new assignment is going to move into the top spot. All right, I'm going to move it later. Just let me try one more time. So I just want to open it up and show it to you. Okay, so questions always stays on top. And now we have the assignment here. So here's the assignment. So poems are filled with poetic elements such as symbols, imagery, figures of speech, metaphors, rhyme, assonance, alliteration, structure. Structure means like forms, like closed forms, and many others. Poems also contain themes. A theme is the underlying message that the writer wants to convey. It can be sometimes as simple as death or love, or more complex like human versus nature. So the instructions from the packet, you're going to select any poem, right? Any poem from the packet or any poem from elements of poetry that we went through just now, the inside, you know, those poems we just read, the rondeau, the poems that are in there, the haiku, any of the poems that we just read. There's more poems than that, plus poems from the poetry packet, which I'm going to open before class is over so we can take a look at it together again. You're going to identify and discuss at least one theme in the poem. That's the second bullet. The other part of the instructions is you're going to identify and discuss at least one poetic element. When I say at least, that means you got to at least do whatever that number is, at least one. If you want to do two themes and you want to look at two, that knock yourself out, but you have to do at least one, right? Same thing with the poetic elements. So you have to do both, at least one theme and at least one poetic element. Okay, the theme should be described and discussed in one paragraph. So one paragraph is going to be about the theme, and the poetic element in another paragraph, right? So you're going to use examples from the text to support your theme and elements, right? Like, you know, like we did before, use an example. All right, the assignment should have an introductory paragraph, right? So the first paragraph should be an introduction, and the paragraph in that introduction, that first paragraph, should name the poem, should name the poet, should give a synopsis of the poem, because pretend I never read the poem, so you got to tell me about it, and then states the theme and the element that you're going to discuss. So like, let's say if you decided to, let's just go to the ones we know. Let's go to the rose that grew from concrete. Let's say I'm going to do that poem. So in that first paragraph, I have to say what the poem, the title of the poem. I have to include, make sure somewhere in that whole first paragraph that I have the title and the author, right, and the poet's name, that I give a synopsis. This poem is about, the challenges, that people face, growing up in difficult situations, and whatever it is you want to say about the poem, so that I have an idea of what the poem's about. And then you're going to say, and the poem has this theme and this poetic element, right? So that's what the first paragraph is going to contain. Then if you do the math, the next paragraph will be talking about the theme, and the next paragraph will talk about the element, right? So here's a PDF. That's my explanation. But in here, there is a packet, a PDF that you can open up, and I'm going to open it up here. And basically, it repeats everything I just said, right? And then it adds. Follow the template and see a sample to help you craft the agreement. Keep in mind that you should be using MLA formatting that asks you that the text should be double spaced. There should be a 1-inch margin around the page. The paragraphs should be indented using the tab key, and there should be no extra spaces between paragraphs or anywhere. Note that if the title of poems are put in quotation marks, right? The quotes, every time you put a title of a poem, put a quote that goes around in quotes, and there shouldn't be italicized, there shouldn't be bold, there shouldn't be underlined. The title of a poem gets quotation marks around it, okay? Then here's a template, right? So here's a template. So your last name will be here only, and the page number, the student first name and last name, my name, the class, and the date. And this is the format for a first page, right? Then every assignment has a title, so the title of whatever the assignment or the essay. And then remember, I just said the first paragraph is going to be the intro paragraph, and it has this information there. Then the second paragraph is going to discuss the theme, and the third paragraph is going to discuss the poetic element. So this is the template, the structure your paper should look like. And here's an example of one using a poem from your packet that another student, samples from another student, right? So it would look like this. So when your final page is done, it should look something like this, right? The formatting, meaning that there should be a 1-inch margin you see around the page. That's part of it too. The text itself is double spaced. Here is the heading, right? The beginning, the last name with the page number, the title, and then there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3 paragraphs, right? 3 paragraphs with it. Well, this is 4 because they do a little explanation there. That could be that, right? So let me make it bigger and just quickly read it. You could read it on your own, but we have a couple of minutes, so I'll read it. So this is called Exploring My Pauper's Waltz by Theodore Rothke, right, with the title. My Pauper's Waltz by Theodore Rothke follows a lyrical poem that shows a relationship between a father and son. The father has come home drunk and clumsily dances around with the boy, making a ruckus as the mother looks on. The poem is told from the perspective of the young boy. One theme the poem shows is love that the son has for his father despite his faults, and one poetic element used well in the poem is rhyme. Okay, so if you notice this, right, it states the poem, gives the poem's name. Even if you have not read the poem, it gives you an idea what the poem's about, right? We know it's about a father coming home drunk. He's going to dance with his kid, clumsy. He's going to make a ruckus. The mother's going to be in the room. She's part of the poem too. The poem is told from the young boy's perspective, and so we know something about the poem. And then it says one theme the poem is going to show is the love the son has for his father, and despite his faults, and one poetic element used well in the poem is rhyme. So here's the first paragraph. One powerful theme in the poem is a son's love for his father. A theme is a poem's message, or sometimes a lesson the poet is trying to convey. The poem states, the whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. This establishes that the father is in fact drunk, when he comes home because the boy can smell the liquor on his papa's breath. Then they dance around in a rough way, bumping into things and knocking things over. Rothke ends the poem with, "You beat time on my head with the palm caked by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt." Even though the father was rough, perhaps even violent with the son, we see the narrator's attachment and yearning for the love of his father by the last image in the poem of him hanging on or clinging to his papa's shirt, right? So it's showing what the love the son has for the father, despite all that drama. So here, there are many poetic forms used in Rothke's work, but one that was apparent was rhyme, with a specific rhyme scheme. Rhyming is a literary element in which words that sound identical or similar are repeated. In the poem, they are repeated in a particular order or a rhyme scheme. In My Papa's Waltz, Rothke follows a strict A-B rhyme structure, meaning that every other line of the poem rhymes. For example, in the first stanza, he writes, "The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hang on like death. Such waltzing is not easy," right? So we got now we know how to do this, right? The pattern is repeated from stanza to stanza and gives a sense of back and forth movement, which connects the idea of a waltz or a dance that is in the title. All right, so this student not only identified it, but gave it, thought about like what it meant to be doing this A-B thing, and it felt like going back and forth feels like dancing on walls, right? So, of course, I want to give you a good example of what the paper could look like, but I want you to look at structure. I want you to think of content. And so this is just an example in your packet. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can take a look at it yourselves when you want to. And I'm going to pause and look and ask questions. So if you have any questions about the assignment that is due to be uploaded in that space on February 16th. Actually, Lindsay, I have to restate what I said earlier in class because I was confusing with my other class. But it's still the same thing. Any questions on the assignment and what you need to do?
Professor, the font size was what, 12?
Yeah, so you could look at it there. It should all be, the font size should be 12 for the whole thing. And you should either use Times Roman or Arial. Those are the two fonts that Emily asks people to use. Sometimes your computer, be conscious of it, because sometimes when you open up a file, it has a default, the default format. Sometimes it's not 1-inch margin. Sometimes the Calibri or some other font is the one that it goes to. So make sure that when you're finishing your assignment before you turn it in, that the formatting is all on point. Okay, if you wanted the group chat for English, text me, okay? So there's, Odalis is once again sending the number out for the group chat. So if people want to join up the WhatsApp group chat, it's in the chat right now. So make sure you've written it down if you haven't joined, so that you could, have your own space to sort things out together. Okay, so if there are no more questions, then we are done for today. I want you to have an amazing weekend, and we'll see each other in a week. And I look forward to reading your assignments when you submit them. Okay, and I'll hang out here for another 5 minutes or so. So if not, have a great afternoon. Thank you for your attention, and we'll keep rocking and rolling.
Bye, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
All right.
Bye,
And
thank you, Professor.
And Lindsay, just make sure you upload your assignment to the thread.
Yeah, so I have a quick question just to be sure. You want me to re-upload the first assignment, or were you not able to see it on?
Yeah. Do you want to hang out for a minute?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So let me because here's let me make sure that I'm not. Okay, here we go. Make sure that I'm not mistaken. So here's discussions, and here's this. Oh, I see you're here. You did do it. So did I just skip you? Yeah, I just skipped you. I'm sorry, Lindsay.
No, it's okay.
I'll take a look at it. So but thanks for bringing it to my attention.
No problem. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, everybody. If there's no more questions, enjoy your afternoon. See you all next week. Yes, Viviana, I saw yours. I'll take a look at yours. But tomorrow morning, you should have a response. All right. Oops. Sorry.
Professor, so the only thing we have to do is just the assignment
The one I
we
just
talked about.
described. Yeah. the
Okay,
one-
that's it.
that's
That's
it.
it. All right, I got it. Thank you.
All right.
Wait, you didn't answer mine.
Say it again.
I asked it since we read the My Papa's Walls poem, I asked if it could still be used, but like with different themes and such, or is it like off limits since there's a whole bunch of poems on the packet?
No, there's nothing off limits. You could use that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Adalis. You too. All right, Hassan and Rafat, have a good afternoon. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to close out the class. All right, take care.